The neighbors later whispered that they had never seen a woman stand so still in the freezing wind, watching her own life collapse. They saw a shivering widow clutching a crumpled envelope with $50 inside, broken by the betrayal of her only son. But they were wrong. They only saw the moment I fell. They did not see the moment I decided that tears were useless and that justice was the only thing worth fighting for. My name is Margaret Hale, and at 58 years old, I believed that the hardest part of my life was already behind me. The funeral was over. The condolences had stopped arriving in the mail. The silence of the house in Redridge, Ohio, was something I was finally learning to navigate without breaking down every morning. But as I stepped out of the heavy oak doors of the law firm and into the biting wind, the tears that stung my eyes were not from grief. They were from relief. The portfolio under my arm felt heavier than paper should. It contained the final accounting of my late husband's estate, a secret Robert had kept even from me until the very end. He had not just left me comfortable, he had left me wealthy. The numbers were staggering, far beyond the modest pension and savings I had anticipated. $7 million in varied trusts and bonds. It was enough to secure not just my future, but Evan's too. I fought the urge to speed as I guided my sedan onto the highway. The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets, turning the world into a blur of white and grey. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, but my heart was racing with a warmth that the heater could not provide. I pictured Evan's face, my boy, my only son. He had been trying so hard lately, or so I thought, stressing over bills and his new business ventures. This money was the lifeline he needed. We could fix the roof. We could pay off his debts. We could finally breathe. "You worry too much, Maggie," Robert used to tell me, his voice a steady rumble that I could almost hear over the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers. I smiled at the windshield, a ghost of a conversation playing out in the privacy of the car. "I worry so you don't have to," I would always reply. He had been my anchor, even in his final days, when the sickness had taken the strength from his body. His eyes had remained fierce. "Promise me," he had whispered, gripping my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Promise me you won't let anyone shrink your world. This is for you. Live free. Maggie, live for yourself." I wiped a tear from my cheek. "I promise." "Robert," I whispered to the empty passenger seat. But in my heart, living for myself meant taking care of our son. That was just who I was. As I turned onto the familiar winding road leading to our family home, the excitement began to curdle into a strange, low-grade anxiety. The storm had darkened the sky to a bruised purple. Yet as my house came into view, it was a black void against the snow. There were no porch lights on. The living room windows were dark. It was barely 5 in the afternoon, but the house looked abandoned. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching loudly over the ice. My chest tightened. Had the power gone out? Was Evan hurt? I grabbed my purse and the precious portfolio, bracing myself against the wind as I hurried to the front door. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers stiff from the cold. But before I could slide the key into the lock, the door jerked open. Evan stood there. He was dressed in a heavy sweater, but he wasn't smiling. His face was pale, his eyes darting from me to the driveway and back again. He did not step aside to let me in. He stood firmly in the center of the frame, blocking my view of the hallway. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. You're back early." The meeting went faster than expected, I said, my teeth chattering as a gust of wind whipped around us. I tried to step forward, expecting him to move, but he held his ground. Evan? Honey, let me in. It is freezing out here, and I have incredible news. He didn't move. He looked almost sick. Maybe you should go back to the car for a minute. Mom, just give me a second. I frowned, confusion overriding the cold. What are you talking about, Evan? Move aside. That was when I heard it. It was a sound that cut through the howling wind, a high-pitched, sharp giggle coming from the living room. It was unmistakable. Lydia, my daughter-in-law. Is Lydia here? I asked, my voice hardening. Why are the lights off? Evan flinched. Mom, please, just wait. I am not waiting in a blizzard, Evan. I pushed past him. He was a grown man, but he yielded to the force of my shove, stumbling back against the wall. I stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow from my coat. I expected the smell of dinner, or perhaps the warmth of the fireplace. Instead, the air in the house was stale and cold. The thermostat had been turned down. I looked into the living room. The darkness was not accidental. Candles were lit, not for ambiance, but as if to stage a scene. And there was Lydia, sitting on the sofa, silhouetted by the flickering light. She wasn't standing to greet me. She wasn't offering to take my coat. She was just watching me. I gripped the portfolio tighter against my chest, the good news dying in my throat. I had walked through that door, expecting to change our lives for the better. I had no idea that the life I intended to save had already been dismantled, piece by piece, while I was out in the snow. Lydia sat sprawled on the velvet sofa, her muddy boots resting directly on the mahogany coffee table Robert had spent months restoring. She looked at me not with the warmth of family, but with the cold, annoyed stare one reserves for a solicitor knocking at dinner time. She did not stand up. She did not take her feet off the table. She simply took a sip of wine, my husband's vintage wine, and smirked. You are dripping on the rug, Margaret, Lydia said, her voice dripping with mock concern. It is really quite rude. I turned to Evan, waiting for him to correct her, waiting for him to be the son I raised. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest, refusing to meet my eyes. Evan, what is going on? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Why are you acting like this? We need to talk about the living arrangements. Mom, Evan said, his voice flat and rehearsed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This house, it is not exactly yours anymore. Not legally. Not right now. I stared at the paper. What are you talking about? My name is on the deed. You signed the transfer of usage rights, he said quickly, reciting a script. Last month, when you were sick with the flu, you signed it so I could use the property as an asset for the business. It grants us full tenancy and decision-making power. I signed a permission slip for a zoning permit. Evan, I cried out, stepping forward. I never signed away my home. Well, you should have read the fine print, Lydia interjected, finally swinging her legs down. She stood up and walked over to the hallway closet. She opened it and dragged out 2 large garbage bags. My stomach dropped. They were my clothes. We need the master bedroom. I am converting it into a spiritual wellness studio. The energy in there is too stagnant. We cannot have you cluttering up the space. You are kicking me out, I whispered, the shock numbing me more than the cold outside. Evan, I am your mother. You are a burden. Mom, Evan snapped, his face flushing red. Do you have any idea how much it costs to keep this place running? You do not contribute anything. You are just existing here, eating our food, using our heat. We are trying to build a future, and you are just a heavy weight dragging us down. I felt the heavy portfolio under my arm, the millions of dollars that could have saved him, that could have given him everything he ever wanted. I almost laughed. The irony was so sharp, it felt like a physical wound. And one more thing, Evan said, extending his hand. Dad's watch, the Patek Philippe. We need it. I instinctively clutched my chest. No, that was his anniversary gift. He wore it every day. You can't have it. We need the collateral. Mom, Evan shouted, stepping closer. Don't be selfish. You are an old woman. What do you need a luxury watch for? I said no, I stated firmly. Lydia let out a sharp sigh of impatience. She marched over, grabbed the garbage bags, and threw them out the open front door. They landed in the snow with a wet thud. Then she turned to me. Before I could react, she shoved me hard in the chest. Get out! She screamed. I stumbled backward, my heels catching on the threshold. I flew out onto the porch, my feet slipping on a patch of black ice. I crashed down hard onto the frozen concrete. A sharp, blinding pain shot through my hip and up my spine. I gasped. The air knocked out of my lungs, lying sprawled in the snow like a discarded rag doll. Evan, I choked out, reaching a hand toward him. Help me? Evan looked down at me. For a second, I saw hesitation in his eyes. Then, he reached into his pocket and tossed a white envelope onto my chest. There is $50 in there, he muttered, looking away. And a list of shelters in the county. They will take you in for the night. Do not come back until you are ready to hand over the watch. Goodbye, Margaret, Lydia said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent, snowy night. Then came the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. I lay there for a long time, the snow melting against my cheek, the cold seeping into my bones. My hip throbbed with a vicious rhythm, slowly, agonizingly. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself up. I dragged my garbage bags and the portfolio which I had never let go of toward my car. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the key in the ignition. I ripped open the envelope Evan had thrown at me. Inside were two $20 bills and a $10 bill, along with a printed sheet of paper listing homeless shelters. I stared at the house. The lights in the living room were back on. I could see their silhouettes moving, celebrating. They thought they had just discarded a useless old woman. They thought they had won. I touched the portfolio sitting on the passenger seat. $7 million, and the mind of a woman who had once managed logistics for a tri-state shipping empire. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, the shaking in my hands stopped. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, sharper than the winter wind. I wiped the wet snow from my face and started the engine. I was not going to a shelter, and I was certainly not going to cry. They wanted to see what life was like without me. I shifted the car into reverse. I would show them. But first, I had a call to make. I drove my sedan past the flashing neon signs of the cheap motels on Evan's list, the heater rattling against the silence of the cabin. I did not stop until I reached the circular driveway of the Oberon, the most prestigious hotel in Redridge. The young valet hesitated as he looked at my 10-year-old car, coated in grime and salt. But the moment I stepped out into the light, the doors swung open. The general manager, Mr. Henderson, came rushing out, his face pale with recognition. "Mrs. Hale," he said, bowing his head slightly. We haven't seen you in years. Is everything quite all right?" "I need the penthouse suite, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady despite the throbbing pain in my hip. "And a bottle of your best scotch. Put it on the corporate account." He didn't ask for a credit card. He didn't ask for ID. He knew who I was. To the neighbours, I was just Margaret, the quiet widow who baked cookies. But to the business world, I was the ghost behind the machine. Robert Hale might have been the charismatic face of Hale Logistics, the man who shook hands and cut ribbons. But I was the chief financial officer. I was the one who turned a local trucking outfit into a federal transport empire. I was the one who negotiated union strikes at 3 a.m. and crushed hostile takeovers before breakfast. For 10 years since Robert died, I had played a role. I lived in a modest house. I drove a sensible car. I wore clothes off the rack. I did it for Evan. I wanted him to learn the value of $1, to build his own life without the crutch of our massive fortune. I thought I was teaching him independence. I realized now, as I limped into the marble lobby, that I had only taught him how to starve. And a starving dog will eventually bite the hand that feeds it. Once inside the suite, I did not cry. I poured a glass of amber liquid and dialed a number I had not called in a professional capacity for a decade. "Merrick Law Firm," the voice answered. "Put Jonas on," I said. "It is Margaret." A moment later, the deep, gravelly voice of our family attorney filled the line. "Margaret, it is nearly 11 at night. Is everything all right?" "Evan just threw me out of my own house. Jonas. He claims he has rights to the property. He and that wife of his think I am a senile old woman who can be discarded." There was a heavy silence on the other end. I was going to call you tomorrow. I found some disturbing flags in the county database this afternoon. "Tell me," I commanded, my tone shedding the softness of a mother and hardening into the steel of a CFO. "Evan is drowning. Margaret," Jonas said, his voice dropping. "He is leveraged at nearly 400%. He owes over $600,000 to various creditors, and that is just the beginning." "It is Lydia, isn't it? She is the architect of the disaster," Jonas confirmed. "She convinced him to invest in a series of high-risk wellness startups that were nothing more than vaporware. When those crashed, she pushed him to borrow from a private lending group in Nevada, not a bank. Margaret, loan sharks. They are desperate. They were counting on your death or your incapacitation to pay off the debt." I gripped the phone tighter. "How bad is it?" "They filed a petition this morning." "Margaret," Jonas said, his voice hesitant. "They are asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent. They claim you are suffering from dementia and paranoia. They want full power of attorney over your estate." I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at me was not the frail creature who had slipped on the ice. She was the woman who had once stared down federal regulators and won. "They want to take my mind," I said softly. "They want to erase me." "I can file an injunction immediately," Jonas said, urgency entering his voice. "We can stop this before it even gets to a judge." "No," I said. "Margaret, did you hear me? I said no, Jonas. Do not stop them." I took a slow sip of the scotch, feeling the burn settle in my chest. "Let them think they are winning. Let them think I am confused and helpless. If they want to play games with my life, I want to see exactly how far they are willing to go. You are playing with fire. If the judge believes them, the judge won't believe them because you and I are going to gather every receipt, every email, and every forged signature they have created. I don't just want to win a lawsuit. Jonas, I want to dismantle them. You sound different, Jonas noted. I have been asleep for 10 years. Jonas, I whispered, watching the snow swirl violently outside the window. But I am awake now. Start the forensic audit. I want to know where every single penny went. Consider it done, Jonas said. And Margaret, welcome back. I hung up the phone and looked out at the city lights of Redridge. Evan and Lydia thought they had thrown out a burden. They had no idea they had just declared war on the most dangerous woman this town had ever seen. Let's begin, I said to the empty room. Jonas Merrick sat across from me at the glass dining table of the penthouse suite. The only light came from the floor lamp, casting long, sharp shadows across the spread of documents he had brought. It was 3 a.m, but neither of us was tired. The adrenaline of catastrophe kept us wide awake. It is worse than I thought, Margaret, Jonas said, sliding a thick stack of bank statements toward me. Much worse. I picked up the first page. It was a credit card statement for a card I did not know Evan possessed. The balance was staggering, $42,000, and the charges were not for business expenses or household necessities. They were for luxury retreats in Sedona, crystal therapy sessions, and weekend workshops for Lydia's so-called spiritual awakening. He is bleeding money, I murmured, flipping the page. He is spending like a man who has millions, not a man who manages a struggling local shipping branch. That is just the surface wound, Jonas said, tapping a finger on a document bound in a blue folder. This is the lethal blow. I opened the folder. It was a mortgage refinancing agreement for my home. My eyes scanned to the bottom of the page, and my breath hitched. There, on the signature line, was my name, Margaret Hale. It was a good forgery, but I knew the tremor in the letters was not mine. It was Evan's. He had practiced this. He forged my signature, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. He mortgaged my house 6 months ago. 6 months, Jonas confirmed. Which means they did not kick you out on a whim because of an argument tonight. They have been planning to displace you for half a year. They just needed the eviction to look like a family dispute, so the neighbours would not ask questions when the for sale sign went up. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the winter air. They need to sell the house to pay off this loan. They cannot pay off this loan, Margaret, Jonas said, leaning forward, his face grim. Look at the lender. I looked. It was not a bank. It was an LLC based in Nevada called Obsidian Capital. That is a predatory lending group, Jonas explained. I did some digging. They lend to desperate people at 25% interest. But here is the twist. Lydia's wellness studio. It is not a business. It is a shell company. I tracked 3 transfers of $10,000 each from Obsidian Capital directly into the studio's account, which were then immediately withdrawn in cash. I looked up, meeting Jonas's eyes. She is laundering money. Or she is paying off blackmail, Jonas corrected. Either way, they are involved with dangerous people. Evan took out a second mortgage on the house last week, a high-risk, short-term loan. He is using one loan to pay the interest on another. It is a death spiral. They are going to lose everything within 60 days. I closed the folder. The picture was complete. They had not just been cruel, they had been desperate. They needed me gone because I was the only obstacle between them and the liquidation of my home. And the competency hearing, I asked. Jonas sighed and pulled out the final document. It was a draft petition for guardianship. They have a doctor, a chiropractor, actually, who Lydia knows willing to testify that you have shown signs of advanced dementia. They want to freeze your assets and take control of your remaining pension to cover their hemorrhage. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below looked peaceful, oblivious to the rot inside my family. "We can file a police report right now," Jonas said, standing up behind me. "Fraud, forgery, elder abuse. I can have Evan in handcuffs by lunch. We can stop the sale, freeze the accounts, and put a restraining order on both of them. Do you want to sue them immediately?" I watched my reflection in the glass. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a hunter who had just found the trail. "No," I said softly. "No?" Jonas asked, confused. "Margaret, they are trying to destroy you." I turned to face him. "If I sue them now, it becomes a messy family legal battle. They will cry to the judge, claim it was a misunderstanding, or that they were trying to help me. No, that is too easy. Then what do you want to do?" "I want them to think they succeeded," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I want them to think I am dead to the world. I want them to believe I am wandering the streets, confused and broken, just like they claim. Let them feel safe. Let them spend money they do not have. Let them invite the world to watch their success." "You want to trap them," Jonas realized. "I do not just want to win." "Jonas," I said, a dark smile touching my lips. "I want to dismantle them piece by piece. I want the world to see exactly who they are when they think no one is watching." I looked back at the documents, the evidence of my son's betrayal. The mother in me was grieving, but the CFO was calculating the risks and the returns. "Let's begin," I whispered. The morning sun did not bring warmth, it only brought clarity. I sat in the high-backed chair of the hotel suite, watching a woman named Regina Cole unpack a sleek metal briefcase on the coffee table. Jonas had recommended her, describing her as a former intelligence contractor who had pivoted to private investigations when the government became too bureaucratic for her taste. She moved with a terrifying efficiency, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for threats before she even spoke. "I got inside while they were at the gym," Regina said, her voice low and clipped. "It took me 12 minutes to plant the audio bugs and the pinhole cameras. They are live. You can see everything from this tablet." She slid a black tablet across the glass table. I looked down, and my breath hitched. There was my living room, displayed in high-definition grey and white. And there were Evan and Lydia, sitting on the sofa where I used to read to my son when he was a boy. Regina tapped the screen to unmute the audio. "I am telling you, Evan, we need to move the timeline up." Lydia's voice came through the speakers, tinny but unmistakable. She was painting her nails, her feet resting on the coffee table. "The moment Margaret is declared incompetent, the bank releases the funds from the trust. We can pay off the loan sharks by Friday. But what if she fights it?" Evan's voice sounded thin, shaky. He was pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "She is not crazy, Lydia. She looked me right in the eye. She knew exactly what was happening. She is an old woman in shock," Lydia snapped, blowing on her nails. And after a few nights in a homeless shelter, she will be too broken to fight anyone. Besides, we have the paperwork. Regina paused the video and pulled a physical file from her bag. Speaking of paperwork, she said, sliding a stack of documents toward me. I found these on Evan's laptop. He has been busy. I opened the folder. It was a fabrication of my entire medical history. There were logs of non-existent doctor visits, notes detailing episodes of confusion that never happened, and a forged letter from a neurologist stating I was suffering from rapid-onset dementia. He is rewriting my reality, I whispered, tracing my finger over a line that claimed I had forgotten my own name 3 times last month. It gets worse, Regina said. She tapped a different file on her computer. I did a deep dive on Lydia. She's not just laundering money for a generic investment group. She owes $75,000 to a loan shark in Las Vegas. I intercepted a voicemail on her burner phone this morning. They gave her until the end of the week. If she does not pay, they threaten to visit her physically. I looked back at the screen. Lydia wasn't just greedy. She was terrified. And she was using my life as her shield. So that is why they are rushing, I said, the realization settling over me like a heavy coat. They need my assets to save themselves from the mob. If we go to the police now, we can arrest them for fraud, Regina suggested. It is a slam dunk. I shook my head slowly. No. If we arrest them now, they become victims of their own stupidity. I want them to be the villains of their own story. I want everyone in Redridge to see it. So, what is the play? Regina asked. Fear, I said. They are banking on me being a nuisance, a confused old woman banging on their door. They expect me to beg. So, I will do the opposite. You are going to vanish, Regina concluded, a small smile playing on her lips. Completely, I replied. I am turning off my phone. I am staying in this suite. To them and to the world. Margaret Hale has disappeared into the ether. When they cannot find me, they will panic. And when people panic, they make mistakes. For the next 3 days, I became a ghost. I watched the tablet as if it were my only window to the world. The effect was immediate. By the second day, Evan was spiraling. I watched him on the camera in the kitchen, his hands trembling as he tried to pour coffee. She is not answering, Evan shouted at his phone, slamming it down on the counter. I have called 40 times. What if she went to the police? What if she is dead in a ditch somewhere? Stop it, Lydia hissed, entering the frame. She looked haggard, dark circles forming under her eyes. If she is dead, it is easier. We just need the death certificate. But we need to file the papers for the competency hearing now. We cannot wait for her to show up. We can't declare her incompetent if we can't find her to serve the papers, Evan yelled, his voice cracking. The lawyer said she needs to be present, or we need proof she is a danger to herself. Then we make proof, Lydia screamed back, grabbing his shoulders. We tell them she ran away. We tell them she is wandering the streets, hallucinating. It makes our case stronger. You idiot. But we have to do it tomorrow. The gala is on Saturday. We need to announce the change in management then. We need the investors to think we have the capital. I watched them turn on each other, the pressure cooker of their own lies beginning to whistle. Lydia was pushing him toward the edge, and Evan was too weak to resist. Do it, Lydia commanded, her eyes wild. Call the lawyer. Tell him she is missing and dangerous. We take the house on Monday. I sat back in my chair, sipping my tea. They were walking right into the trap. Regina, I said, not looking away from the screen. Get Jonas. Tell him to prepare the final evidence. They are making their move. And you? Regina asked. I am going to get ready for a party, I said. It seems I have an invitation to a gala on Saturday. The video feed from the hidden camera in Clifford Hart's office was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. Regina had managed to slip a bug into the reception area of his practice, a dingy office located in a strip mall on the edge of town. It was fitting, I thought, that my son and his wife were plotting my demise in a place that smelled of stale smoke and cheap cologne. I watched from my hotel suite as Evan placed a thick file on Hart's desk. This is the medical history, Evan said, his voice trembling slightly. We have a statement from Dr. Eris declaring her mentally unfit. It details episodes of paranoia, memory loss, and violent outbursts. I gripped the arm of my chair. Violent outbursts. I had never raised a hand against anyone in my life. Yet my own son was painting me as a danger to society to expedite a court order. Clifford Hart, a man whose license had been suspended twice for malpractice, flipped through the fabricated pages with a greedy smile. This is excellent, Hart croaked. With her currently missing and this history of instability, the judge will grant an emergency ex parte guardianship. You will have full control of her assets by Monday morning. Lydia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. And the trust funds, the liquid assets, accessible immediately upon the judge's signature, Hart assured her, to pay for her medical care, of course. Evan slumped back in his chair, running a hand over his face. I just want this over with, he muttered. Once she signs that final paper, once she is legally out of the way, everything will finally be ours. It is already ours. Babe, Lydia whispered, patting his hand, not with affection, but with possession. We just need to make it official. I signaled Regina to cut the feed. I had seen enough. The betrayal was no longer a sharp knife. It was a dull, heavy ache. They were not just desperate. They were malicious. They are moving fast, Regina said, closing her laptop. But so are we. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Jonas. He walked in, carrying a single, thin folder, his expression unreadable. It is done. Margaret, Jonas said, placing the folder before me. I set up the shell company. Redridge Holdings. We approached Obsidian Capital this morning. They were more than happy to offload a high-risk debt for a lump sum payment. I opened the folder. Inside was the transfer of debt agreement. I looked at the number at the bottom. $642,000. That was the price of my son's freedom, and I had just bought it. So, I said, tracing the signature line, I am the bank now. You are? Jonas confirmed. You are the sole creditor for the mortgage on your house and his business loans. Technically, you own him. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Evan thought he was running from a faceless corporation in Nevada. He had no idea he was running straight back to his mother. There is one more thing, Regina said, hesitating for the first time since I met her. She pulled a glossy brochure from her bag and slid it across the table. I looked at the cover. Sunrise Haven, Assisted Living and Memory Care. I found this in Lydia's email drafts. Regina explained softly. They aren't planning to keep you at home, Margaret. They have already filled out the intake forms. They are looking for the cheapest room available, the ward for severe cases. I stared at the brochure. They were going to lock me away. They were going to drug me, silence me, and leave me to rot in a state-run facility while they drank my husband's wine and spent my life savings. "When is the party?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow night," Regina answered. "They are calling it the grand opening of the Solstice Wellness Studio." But really, it is a victory lap. They invited half the town. They want to show off their new success to potential investors. I stood up and walked to the closet where I had hung the dress I bought earlier that day. It was black, sharp, and elegant, the kind of dress the CFO of Hale Logistics used to wear to board meetings when heads were about to roll. They think I am a confused, helpless old woman wandering in the snow, I said, turning back to my team. They think I am going to be dragged away quietly to a nursing home. "What do you want to do?" Jonas asked. I smiled, and for the first time in days, it was genuine. "I think it is time I attended a party," I declared. "Evan wants to launch his new life tomorrow." "Fine. I will be there to cut the ribbon." The black dress I had admired the night before hung on the door of the hotel closet, sleek and commanding. It was the armor of a woman who was ready to go to war. But as I stood before the mirror, Jonas Merrick placed a hand on my shoulder and shook his head. "If you walk in there looking like a queen, Margaret, they will say you have been spending your savings on vanity while your family suffers," Jonas said, his voice low and calculating. "They will say your competence is intact, which paradoxically helps their defense that you left of your own free will. No? If you want to bury them, you need to let them dig the hole first." He was right. I reached past the black silk and pulled out the stained, wrinkled wool coat I had worn the night Evan threw me into the snow. I did not brush my hair. I did not hide the dark circles under my eyes that 3 sleepless nights had carved into my face. I needed to look exactly like what they claimed I was, a confused, abandoned old woman. "The file is ready," Jonas said, handing me a thick manila envelope. "Inside is the forensic analysis of the forged mortgage documents, the proof of the illegal transfers to the shell company, and the deed of assignment that proves you are now the owner of Evan's debt. The moment you give the signal, I will step in with the sheriff." "And the audio?" I asked, turning to Regina. Regina held up her tablet, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "I have hijacked the Bluetooth system of the venue. The moment Lydia finishes her speech, I will play the recording of them plotting to throw you in the state facility. It will play on every speaker in the house." "Good," I whispered. "Let's go home." The drive to my house was surreal. The driveway, usually dark and quiet, was lined with luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, and Lexuses belonging to the local elite. Evan and Lydia had gone all out. The windows glowed with golden light, and I could hear the hum of music and laughter spilling out into the cold night air. It was a celebration of theft, funded by money they did not have. I waited in the shadows of the porch until the music died down. Through the window, I saw Lydia standing on a makeshift stage in the center of the living room. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown, holding a glass of champagne, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur she pretended to be. "We are so grateful to everyone for being here tonight." Lydia's voice rang out, amplified by a microphone. "Launching Solstice Wellness has been a dream. It has been difficult, of course. As many of you know, we have had to make hard sacrifices to care for Evan's mother. Her declining mental state has been a heavy cross to bear." The crowd murmured sympathetically. "She wandered off 3 days ago," Lydia continued, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "We are praying she is safe, but we have to accept that her mind is simply gone. We are just trying to protect what is left of the family legacy. That was my cue. I pushed the front door open. It swung wide with a heavy creak that cut through the silence of the room. A blast of winter wind rushed in, extinguishing the candles near the entrance. I stood there, shivering, clutching my coat around me, my hair wind-blown and messy. I looked small. I looked frail. The room went dead silent. 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the ghost in the doorway. "Mom!" Evan's voice cracked. He dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Lydia froze on the stage, her mouth slightly open. For a second, I saw pure terror in her eyes, but she recovered quickly, her survival instinct kicking in. "Margaret!" Lydia cried out, her voice pitching up into a theatrical wail of relief. "Oh, thank God you are alive." She rushed off the stage, pushing through the guests, but she stopped 5 feet away from me, acting as if she were afraid to approach. "Where have you been?" Lydia demanded, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have been sick with worry. You stopped taking your medication, Margaret. You can't just run away like that." The guests began to whisper. I could hear them. Poor Lydia. Look at the old woman. She looks totally lost. "Is she dangerous?" Evan stepped forward, his face pale and sweating. He tried to block me from the view of his investors. "Mom, come on. Let's get you to the kitchen." "You are confusing everyone. You need to sit down." He reached for my arm, his grip hard and bruising, trying to drag me away before I could speak. "I am not confused, Evan," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. It did not shake. It carried the steel resonance of a woman who had once commanded boardrooms. Evan flinched as if I had slapped him. He let go of my arm. "I did not run away," I continued, looking past him, locking eyes with Lydia. "And I do not need medication?" "She is having an episode," Lydia shouted, looking frantically at the guests. "Please, everyone, ignore her. She doesn't know what she is saying. Evan, get her out of here. Call the orderlies." The crowd shifted uneasily. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for the scene to turn tragic. But I just stood there, unmoving. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the invitation to the party that Regina had intercepted. I smoothed it out and looked up at my son and daughter-in-law. "You said I was a burden," I said softly, but in the silence, it sounded like a shout. "You said I had no value left, so I came to see what you built with the money you stole from me." "That is enough," Evan hissed, his eyes darting around the room. "Mum, stop it. You are embarrassing yourself." I looked at him, and then I looked at the crowd. I let a small, faint smile touch my lips. It wasn't a smile of senility. It was the smile of the executioner who had just checked the sharpness of the blade. "Oh, Evan," I said, my voice dripping with a terrifying calmness. "I am not the one who should be embarrassed." I raised my hand slightly, signaling toward the window where Regina was watching. The storm had arrived. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a resounding crash that silenced the orchestra instantly. Jonas strode into the room, his expression like granite, flanked by 3 uniformed police officers and a stern man clutching a leather briefcase. The air in the room shifted from celebratory to suffocating in a single second. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Evan shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to maintain his facade of authority. "Security, get these people out." Jonas ignored him completely and nodded sharply to Regina. She tapped a key on her laptop, and the massive projection screen behind the stage flickered. The image of the sophisticated charity gala vanished, replaced by shaky, grainy footage. The entire room gasped. On the screen, a fragile woman was being violently shoved out of a front door into a blinding white blizzard. The wind in the video howled, but Evan's voice cut through it clearly. "Get out, make room for people who actually matter." The on-screen, Evan screamed, throwing a suitcase into the snow. The guests turned their heads in unison, staring at the real Evan with undisguised horror. The murmurs began like a rising tide. Is that his mother?" One woman whispered loudly near the front. "I thought he said she was in a luxury retirement home." Another man muttered. Lydia, sensing the ship was sinking, immediately stepped away from her husband. She pointed a manicured finger at him, her face twisting into a mask of victimhood. "I told him not to do it," Lydia screeched, her voice shrill and desperate. "He is a monster. I begged him to let her stay. But he threatened me too. I am a victim here." Regina pressed another key. The video cut out, replaced by a high-quality audio recording that boomed through the speakers. "Once the old hag freezes out there, the house is ours by morning." Lydia's voice sneered from the speakers, dripping with malice. "We forged the deed transfer, pay off the lawyer, and she will be nothing but a memory. I want her room for my yoga studio." Lydia froze, her mouth hanging open as the colour drained from her face. The guests looked at her with pure disgust. "Lies, deep fakes," Evan roared, sweat pouring down his forehead. "This is a setup. I own this property. I have the mortgage papers." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Evan Holloway, I am the senior risk officer for the First National Bank," he announced, his voice projecting clearly across the silent hall. "We have audited your recent filings. Your mortgage application was based on fraudulent collateral and forged signatures. You are in default effective immediately." "You can't do this," Evan yelled, trembling. "I have 30 days to cure a default under normal circumstances." "Yes," Jonas interjected, stepping up to the microphone. However, the bank was eager to offload such a toxic asset. "They put the debt up for sale 10 minutes ago." Jonas held up a thick stack of documents stamped with a red seal. "And it was purchased in full." Jonas continued, his eyes locking onto Evan. "The new owner of your debt, your house, and effectively your future, is right here." He turned and gestured to me. "The creditor is Mrs. Margaret Holloway." A silence so profound fell over the room that I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Evan looked at me, his eyes wide with comprehension and terror. He realized that I did not just hold the moral high ground. I held the legal deed to his entire existence. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the polished floor, the sound echoing through the hall. He crawled toward me, ignoring the hundreds of eyes watching his humiliation. "Mom, Mommy, please," Evan sobbed, grabbing the hem of my coat with shaking hands. I didn't know. It was the stress, the business. "I love you, Mom. We are family. You can't let them ruin me." I looked down at him. The boy I had raised, the man who had thrown me into the snow to die, was now groveling at my feet. Before I could answer, the officers moved. 2 of them grabbed Lydia by the arms. "Lydia Holloway, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted manslaughter. The officer stated, "No, get your hands off me. Do you know who I am?" Lydia screamed, thrashing as the silver handcuffs clicked tight around her wrists. "Evan, do something. Tell them Evan did not look up. He was too busy weeping on my shoes." I looked at the two of them, one being dragged away, screaming, the other broken on the floor. I felt no surge of triumph, no burning hatred. It was just a cold, hollow realization that the bond was severed. They were simply strangers who had made a terrible calculation. "It is over. Evan," I said softly, my voice steady. "You chose your prize. Now you must pay the price." The legal transfer of the estate did not happen with fireworks or applause. It happened in the quiet, sterile air of Jonas's conference room 3 days after the gala. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, watching Evan sign the papers that stripped him of the title to the family home, the vacation property, and the luxury cars he had purchased with leveraged debt. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The arrogance that had defined him for the last decade had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked terrified of his own shadow. "That is the last signature required," Jonas said, sliding the heavy file toward me. I placed my hand on the documents. The house was mine again, but looking at the deed, I felt no desire to return to those empty halls. It was a museum of memories, some beautiful, some now painfully tainted. "You have 2 paths now, Evan," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "I have assumed the immediate debt to stop the bank from pressing criminal charges against you for the mortgage fraud. However, you owe me that money. You can set up a payment plan based on a percentage of your future income, or you can declare bankruptcy and start from zero. The choice is yours." Evan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I don't know how to start from zero. Mum, I don't know if I can. You are 34 years old." I replied, "It is time you learned." He took the hard road. To his credit, he did not run. He declared bankruptcy. 2 weeks later, I heard through an acquaintance that Evan had moved into a small, second-floor walk-up on the east side of town. It was a working-class neighborhood, far from the country clubs he used to frequent. He had taken a job as a shift supervisor at a logistics warehouse. For the first time in his life, my son was sweating for his paycheck. I made changes of my own. I sold the large estate. It was too big for one woman. And I wanted a fresh start. I bought a sun-drenched apartment in the city centre, a place with large windows and no ghosts. On my first night in the new apartment, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. I pulled out the small, framed photograph of my late husband that I had rescued from my suitcase that snowy night. For months, looking at his face had brought me a sharp, stabbing pain guilt that I had let his legacy crumble, anger that his son had betrayed us. But tonight, the pain was gone. We did it, my love. I whispered to the photo. It was not the way we planned, but the lesson is finally being taught. My solitude was not lonely. Jonas and Regina came over for dinner every Friday. They were no longer just my attorney and my investigator. They were the family I had chosen. We laughed over wine and pasta, discussing books and politics, never mentioning the chaos of the past unless necessary. The people of Redridge treated me differently now. The pitying glances were gone, replaced by respectful nods. They saw a woman who had walked through the fire and refused to burn. Yesterday, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, though shakier than I remembered. It was from Evan. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. There were no requests for money, no excuses, and no blame shifting. It was just an apology. He wrote about how hard the work was, how tired his feet were at the end of the day, and how he finally understood the value of the dollar his father had tried to teach him about so many years ago. I miss you, Mom. The letter ended. I am so sorry for everything. I hope one day I can earn the right to see you again. I folded the letter carefully. I did not reach for a pen to reply. Not yet. The ache in my chest was still there the morning of the relationship we once had. I had regained my dignity and my assets, but I had lost the illusion of my son. We were building something new now, something based on truth rather than enabling. I placed the letter in a drawer with 2 others he had sent. Soon, I said to the empty room. But not today. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift you handed over because you felt guilty. It was a destination, and Evan still had a long way to walk before he could meet me there. 6 months after the court settled the final details of the property transfer, my doorbell rang. I was not expecting guests, and when I opened the door, I felt a momentary jolt of instinctual caution. It was Evan. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant man in the Italian suit who had sneered at me in the lawyer's office. He was wearing faded jeans and a heavy flannel shirt stained with dust. His face was tanned, not from a vacation in the tropics, but from exposure to the sun. He looked tired, but for the first time in his life, he looked solid. "I am not here for money." "Mum," Evan said quickly, holding up his hands. His fingernails were short and rimmed with grease. "And I am not here to ask you to let me back into the family trust." I stood in the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. "Why are you here, Evan?" I asked. He looked down at his work boots, shifting his weight. "I just wanted to tell you," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I got a job, a real one. I am working as a foreman at a landscaping company. It is hard labor. I come home aching every single day." He paused, looking up to meet my eyes. "But I pay my own rent." He continued. "I buy my own groceries. And I realized something. You were right. About everything. I was a leech. I am trying to fix it. I am trying to be decent." He took a breath, his eyes glistening. "I do not expect you to forgive me," he whispered. "I just wanted you to know." I looked at him for a long moment. A part of me, the mother in me, wanted to reach out and smooth the hair back from his forehead. But I stayed where I was. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer tears. I simply nodded. "Good," I said softly. "Keep going." Evan nodded back, swallowing hard. He turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. As the doors closed, I realized that by refusing to save him, I had finally saved him. He was learning the one lesson my money had always protected him from: how to be a man. A week later, I sat in a conference room with a team of financial advisors and lawyers. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret Jonas asked, looking over the documents. "This is a significant portion of your recovered assets." "I am sure," I replied firmly. "I want to start the foundation immediately." We established a legal fund and housing network for elderly women who had been financially exploited or abandoned by their families. I was not content to simply survive my own tragedy. I wanted to make sure other women had the weapons to fight theirs. 3 months later, I stood on a stage in a hotel ballroom, facing 500 women. I told them my story. I did not use Evan's name. I spoke only of the betrayal and the darkness, and the moment I decided to light a match rather than curse the dark. Sometimes, I said into the microphone, my voice ringing clear and strong, loss is a gift. It clears away the false things so you can finally see who you really are. The silence in the room lasted for a heartbeat, and then the audience rose. The applause was not polite, it was thunderous. I looked out at the sea of faces, women who had been discarded, ignored, and underestimated, and I saw hope. That night, I stood by the large window of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. I held a glass of wine, feeling the cool glass against my fingers. The silence in my home was not empty. It was full of possibility. I thought of my late husband. I remembered the last thing he had whispered to me in the hospital, a phrase I had forgotten in my grief until now. You deserve peace. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached my eyes. I have it now, my love. I whispered to the night air. I finally have it. My life was no longer defined by who I had raised or who I had lost. It was mine. It was peaceful. It was powerful. And for the first time in 62 years, I was completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and resilience, please hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a big like, and press the hype button to help share this story with more people who might need to hear it.